You're listening to the Co-Creator Network because you do create your own reality.
This is Maxine Taylor, host of Move Into the Magic. And my guest, David Wilcock, is with me once again. David, please continue with what you were saying. Back up, introduce it for people who may not have heard the first part, and then it's all yours.
Okay, we have been discussing a new release that I came out with through Penguin Books and their division Dutton Books. The president of the company actually approached me and said, David, you've got saturation on the internet like nobody I've ever seen. There's so many people that have written about your stuff and linked to your videos or copied your videos, stolen them. You know, you've got millions of hits on your videos and all this stuff is going on. So let's take your video, 2012 Enigma, which was #1 on Google, most viewed on December 1st, 2008. Let's take that and make a whole book out of that. And what happened was that this was like a jump start to my whole psychological structure in life, where I said, okay, this is a very big deal. This is the president of the company, the guy who was responsible for making Eckhart Tolle into Eckhart Tolle, published the book New Earth, got Eckhart Tolle on Oprah, and was Eckhart Tolle's editor on the book New Earth. And he comes to me and he says, David, I completely believe you are the next Eckhart Tolle, and your career has as much upside as his did when we got to him. And I want to help make you into that person. I'm like, well, shit, where do I sign?
Took you all of 1.5 seconds, huh?
Yeah. But then I had to swallow hard and say, oh, my God, okay. I have been cataloging and archiving and documenting all of this research for 30 years. And it's a lot of homework. It's a lot of stuff to do. And I have never wanted to really go through all of it and audit everything and put it all together in one book. But once he told me this, and I'm thinking, well, by the time this book comes out, I'm not going to have time to do another one before whatever happens in 2012. So this is it.
Yes.
And that's when I finally got it. It's like, okay, if you're ever going to do anything with all this research you've done, you've got to do it now.
Yes.
This is it.
Yes.
And I'm going, oh, my God. So I did have a romantic relationship through most of the time that I was working on this, which was difficult. Now, my girlfriend was not happy because she had to contend herself with really not getting very much of my attention. And I don't care to, publicize that I'm in a relationship, but, because people just handle it inappropriately, and I don't want her to get unwelcome attention. But it was a stressful, horrible process writing this book. We've healed tremendously since then, but I was very stressed out. I got angry a lot. I had a short temper because the complexity of what I was doing, and then over and above that, I've still got to maintain an internet presence. I've still got to write articles. I've still got to do conferences, because if I don't write articles, nobody buys my stuff, and I go bankrupt. And if I don't do conferences, I don't have an income. So the whole time, I'm basically running on fumes, because the initial advance I got for writing this is not very much. It certainly wasn't enough to pay the bills for very long. So I've got this incredible task in front of me of maintaining a presence on the internet and also writing the most hideously complex thing I've ever done in my life. And after combing through, in some cases, as I said in last week's show, over 100 editing passes in the single paragraph. Just reading it and rereading it and changing things each time.
Yes.
And then hammering through multiple passes of editorial review where, we just kept cutting it down and everything is condensed, but I also made it as readable as possible. I tried to make it totally accessible to the person who doesn't have a college education, doesn't have a PhD. This is not a scientific paper. It is a paper it's a book that is written to take you down the rabbit hole, to give you the red pill.
It is awesome. The book itself, as I mentioned last week, there is not one extraneous word in it. And I am not a scientist, and I could not put the book down at all. I'm going to reread it because there's so much information in it. You cannot do it the first time. And
I deliberately did it that way. I deliberately made it so that by the time you get to the end and you read where it's going and what the finale is and where all this stuff ends up taking you, you have to read it again.
Now, David, would you, and I know we had left off last week we were talking about Obama and what's going on, but please, let's digress for just a moment. And can you give my listeners a little taste of the fantastic ending of your book?
Sure. The book ends with a discussion of disclosure.
Yes.
There's actually, I mean, this is maybe I'm revealing a little too much, but there are actually two endings to the book. And it's sort of like the higher chakra ending and then the mid-chakra ending. The higher chakra ending is chapter 19. That originally was the end of the book. The higher chakra ending of chapter 19 is where I'm talking about Zoroastrian prophecy and the idea that all of these apocalyptic myths that we have in various religions and spiritual traditions were derived from a single source, and this was the work of two historians, Boyce and Grenett. And that source was originally in Siberia before the Earth changed on its axis. And those Aryans, as they are called, and this is where all the weird Aryan bloodline stuff comes from.
Yes.
But there is a positive core to it. It was a civilization which people like the Nazis were aspiring to know more about because they went to Tibet and they saw these guys doing incredible, miraculous feats of consciousness.
Like the levitation.
Yeah, and they traced it back to the Aryans. That's where the Tibetans are displaced Aryans. And so the original Aryan religion was then distilled by Zarathustra, whose name was mispronounced as Zoroaster.
Right.
And that becomes Zoroastrianism. The religion migrated down to Iran and India, and it bifurcated in two directions. It was Zoroastrianism and Hinduism. You look at the Hindu scriptures, and they're loaded with references to Vimana, these flying craft.
Yes.
And they also talk about this Kriya age, the coming of a golden age. And they actually say that there's going to be the return of Shiva the Destroyer, and actually Kalki the Destroyer comes with the 8 supernatural faculties, basically like telekinesis, instant manifestation, levitation, all kinds of wonderful ascended abilities, and basically comes to this planet and kicks ass and gets rid of the bad guys. That's what you see in the Hindu tradition. They also have very curious references to what they call the Samvartika fire. And the Samvartika fire is a reference to this brilliant burst of light that seems to be of an electrical crackling white consistency, which they basically say occurs all over the earth. And it occurs at the end of an age. And the ETs that basically colonized the earth, that's what the Aryans were. You got to remember now, the unconventional history we're starting to dig up has now suggested, and I've had this confirmed from my top insiders, Atlantis and the civilization that was at war with Atlantis in Siberia, which was the Aryans, those are two different colonies of extraterrestrials that came to the earth. They look human. They could interbreed with people on Earth, but they did not originate here. That's why you see pyramids that are built with no pottery shards or evidence of a sophisticated technology leading up to the ability to levitate giant blocks of stone. Because these folks came here and they already had that technology. They didn't need anything. They didn't need anything except what they brought with them, so they just started quarrying stone and you look all over the earth, and you see there's over 3,300 different ancient monuments built out of massive blocks of stone, and all of them are built on a worldwide energetic pattern called the global grid. And in the book, I talk about the work of Ivan Sanderson, who actually studied where all the planes were disappearing out of the sky and where all the ships were vanishing on the surface of the ocean. And they don't just happen any old place. They happen in 10 distinct locations, and then you add the North and the South Pole, and that gives you 12. And those 12 points on the surface of the Earth are all equidistant from each other. They're about 36 degrees apart from one to the next. And you connect the dots, and you get a geometry called the icosahedron, which is basically 20 equilateral triangles put into kind of like a soccer ball type of shape. Well, that geometry can then be flipped inside out, and then you get a dodecahedron, which has pentagons. There's 12 pentagonal faces. You flip those two geometries together, and you now have the full grid that was discovered originally by Sanderson, and then the inversion of it, the dodecahedron part, was put in by the Russian scientists, Goncharov, Morozov, and Makarov. And what those Russians did is they looked at all these ancient monuments around the world, and they found that by simply drawing the geometry of where these 12 vortex points are on Earth, you now have a system of lines that shows you every single place where any of these ancient monuments were built. So I propose in the book that it may be as simple as you can't build them anywhere else because you're not going to be able to levitate the stones. You need the grid to do this levitation. Well, the technology that they would levitate with must be super advanced. No, it's not. And you refer to Tibetan acoustic levitation.
Yes.
Which is an amazing, amazing example. It's like your brain hurts when you try to put this together. How the hell did this happen? But it's a major point that I address in the book.
And I loved it.
Yeah, you've got these extraterrestrials that have basically elongated skulls, and you can see them in the dynasties of Egypt all the way up through about the 15th or 16th dynasty. Everybody's got a funky head with like twice the brain capacity that we normally would have. And didn't quite get into those skulls very much in the book because there was a limit to how far I could take the scope, but I did a video that your listeners can go see, which is called The Source Field Investigations. Just look for it on YouTube. It's 2 hours long. It's totally amazing, where I show you these skulls, picture after picture after picture of ancient Egyptian pottery and carvings and artifacts that gives you an undeniable view of what these people's bodies look like, and they do not look exactly like us. They're different. So those were the Aryans, and they didn't originate in Egypt. They migrated there originally from Siberia, which then got covered over with ice. And, of course, now Russian archaeologists have found those skulls in Siberia. And I link to that in the video. And, again, I didn't find that research until after I wrote the book. So the investigation goes on. And that's why I put it into the video, because it was so important to augment the book. So anyway, these people go to Tibet, and this scientist named Dr. Jarl goes there in the mid-20th century on behalf of this scientific society in Britain. And he witnesses them doing something that seems to be beyond all rational comprehension. They have these gigantic blocks of stone, 3 feet by 3.5 feet large. I mean, we're talking huge. They have to have a whole team of oxen just to drag this stone into position. The stone is placed in a little bowl-shaped declivity of stone that they carved into the ground, and then they surround the stone about 100 feet back, and I forget the exact dimensions, but it's all in the book. They surround it with a quarter-circle arc of trumpets and drums. Why the hell would they do that? Well, what they do is there's trumpets of various lengths and there's drums of various lengths. There's like 3 different sizes for the trumpets and 3 different sizes for the drums. And it turns out that those sizes of each of the trumpets and drums are exact harmonic proportions of the volume of the stone. The volume of the trumpet and the volume of the drum is an exact harmonic of the stone. Then behind each of the trumpets, they've got like 5 or 6 monks in a line, or behind the drums, 5 or 6 monks in a line. Everybody's chanting, everybody's meditating. And then what they start doing is they start banging the drums and blowing the trumpets all in one sudden terrible sound. And they do it very, very slowly at first. They wait minutes between each blast. And then they keep speeding it up until eventually they get to the point where it's happening at a pretty good clip. Again, it sounds terrible. The drums are not skinned with animal heads. They're skinned with metal. So the clanging of metal against metal is a jarring noise. The trumpets don't sound good either. This is not something they're doing for pleasure. Because what happens is the stone starts wobbling. And the next thing you know, it starts levitating up into the air. And it makes this slow, lumbering course of a 500-meter trip. It takes several minutes for it to go through the whole trip. It's slowly hovering up into the air, and they have to keep beating the drums and trumpets while it's levitating. Now, anybody who prides themselves on how intelligent they are, and they're the quote-unquote highly intelligent skeptic, they're going to be laughing right now saying, David is an idiot. But if you read the book, I explain exactly how this works and why it works. And it's stunning. Because ultimately, the core of the argument is that atoms and molecules are not made of particles. They're actually made of gravity, which is the source field. The source field, in my definition, it's the consciousness that makes the universe. It makes space. It makes the flow of time. It makes matter. It makes energy. That source field is actually written into the gravitational field. That's where you find it. And we woefully have misunderstood gravity. We don't have a clue about how much good stuff is hidden in gravity. And gravity is actually flowing into the earth to make the atoms in the earth exist. If you take away gravity, the earth could not exist. It would dematerialize. Gravity is what's flowing into those atoms. And again, that's not just something I made up. There's really good scientific backing for that, such as Maxine, who saw that the physics around the nucleus of the atom and the physics around a black hole is identical. So hence the gravitational flow is what's powering an atom. So the gravitational flow is fluid-like, and the fluids, when you vibrate them, create geometry. So that's where you get your global grid from. It's a geometric vibration or pulsation within the gravitational field itself. And specifically, I want to get really clear here. As the gravity is flowing into the Earth, in some areas it's spinning more than other areas. And you're not going to feel that standing up on Earth because you're too small. You're not going to notice a very slight bias in the gravitational spin, but you will notice it if you're looking at the oceans because the gravity of the moon is pulling the water up and down. And that's what makes the tide. Well, there are tides in the gravity field that goes into the Earth, and they spin. And over thousands of miles, they create vortexes. Those vortexes are literally creating tornadoes. A tornado is not just a weather phenomenon. A tornado is a gravitational vortex. It's a spin in gravity, which is then the gravity is capturing atoms and molecules in the atmosphere and making a funnel cloud. And so in the book I talk about how when you have a tornado sweep through an area, it starts dematerializing things in the area, and it blends matter together with other matter. And I have photographs of this in the book.
Yes.
I'm sure you must have been stunned at the amount of documentation I had.
Oh.
Tornado dematerializations.
And the pictures are, well, a picture is worth 1,000 words.
You're darn right. And we got two of them. We got one where there's a board that blew through another board, and there's another one where a plank blew through 3.5-inch or an inch-thick sheet iron in a railroad bridge. It just pops right through the bridge.
It's unbelievable.
And it doesn't leave a dent. If you fired this thing with a cannon at the bridge, you would totally expect that the metal would have dented. And it doesn't dent at all. And we've got stories about a brick shooting through the walls of the house, and the entrance and exit points in the stucco are narrower than the actual width of the brick. And that would imply that the walls were like liquid, and yes, the brick just pops through the liquid, and then the liquid goes, and it just kind of mushes back together.
That was a fascinating fact.
Yeah, and there's tons of stuff like this in the book. And it's a whole science that's all out there. I mean, you remember that the places I got those tornado anomalies from, for the most part, were like National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Association and from NASA. They put the stuff out there, but nobody's ever done the homework and tied it all together.
But it's in your book.
It is. So getting back to this Tibetan acoustic levitation thing, the real secret is that if physical matter is made of a vibration, and it's basically the fluid energy of gravity flowing through, then how do we unify that with Einstein's physics? How do we unify that with the idea that the Einsteinian model says that as you go towards light speed, first of all, you're going through time faster, so in effect, you're going to experience what for Earth people would be 500 years in just a few minutes. But not only do you go faster through time, but the other thing that happens at the same time in Einstein's model is that you're supposedly gaining mass. So that all the skeptics who shoot down UFO theory say, well, by the time you get to light speed, you're as massive as the whole universe. Therefore, light speed is an impossible barrier that we can never cross. F you, UFO people, it could never be done. Einstein, quote-unquote God, has proven that this can't happen. Well, the God of physics, Einstein, made a mistake on this one thing. He was very close. He made an equation that's a fraction. There's a top part and a bottom part with a line in the middle. You can literally tip that fraction over, tip it upside down, and the equation still works. And in fact, all the other laws of physics are still holding together. Nothing gets damaged, except that now, as you go towards light speed, you're dematerializing rather than increasing in mass. Your mass is disappearing. This was proven by Dr. Vladimir Ginzburg, and I have all the documentation in the book about that. Ginzburg's discovery is very amazing because what we find out is that as physical matter goes towards light speed, it's similar to the idea of pushing a beach ball below the surface of a swimming pool. That's what I'm saying dematerialization is. The beach ball is not dematerializing. It's merely going below the water line. As it goes below the water line, everything above the water line is what we would call conventional reality. We can't see the boat, we can't see the beach ball. We think it's disappeared. But if you hold your hand on it, it's going to stay underwater. The underwater is actually, in our terms, a parallel reality where all the rules of space and time are completely flipped inside out. And that was discovered by Dr. Dewey Larson. This means that on a quantum level, something that looks like a particle is suddenly dematerializing and turning into a wave, and it has what they call non-locality. Everybody gets all hip on the non-locality in space. They say, yeah, well, it's not in any one location anymore. But we also know that non-locality is in time, meaning that when these particles pop into waves, they no longer exist in the present. They exist partly in the past, partly in the present, and partly in the future. Now, that is a mind-blowing concept. In fact, I'm sure you probably get a headache as I'm trying to tell you this, and you're trying to make sense out of it. But if you've read the book, after a while of reading chapter after chapter where I talk about how this works, you're going to start to be able to get it.
Because you've built on it. You've done it step by step so that you take the reader with you. And you know what, David? It feels right. I always go by how it feels. But go ahead.
Yeah, and not only, feeling is one thing, but we're talking about hardcore, extensive, voluminous, documented scientific proof. The tornado shoots through an area, and you've got, in one case in India, there was a piece of bamboo that went through a 5-foot thick wall of bricks. And it doesn't puncture the bricks, except it doesn't break them. It just pops right through. How is that possible? What I've been trying to say here is the tornado is a spin field of gravity. The gravity is what's pushing the air around. And if you accelerate atoms over the light speed boundary, they dematerialize. So the big epiphany that I had writing this book, probably the finest thing that I discovered in writing the book that I didn't already know, and it just came by putting all this information together, this 30 years worth of research that I went through to do this. I had stacks of books on either side of my desk that were 3 feet tall, as you can imagine. It was insane, the amount of work I did to do this. But what I finally figured out is, oh my God, atoms and molecules are trembling over the light-speed boundary all the time. That's why they're always having wave-particle duality. Wave-particle duality is not just photons of light. It happens with electrons, it happens with protons, it happens with neutrons, it happens with single atoms, and it even happens with clusters of atoms. In other words, you can take a cluster of carbon atoms, a buckyball it's called, 60 carbon atoms that look like a soccer ball. You slam it against a wall, and when it hits the wall, it pops into a wave, and it shoots through two slits at once. Even though it's supposedly a solid object, they can detect that it's going through two different slits at the same time.
Yes.
But then once it pops back out, it pops back into a solid ball again. And then I also show all these other things that prove the same thing happening, like Kozyrev, this Russian scientist who drops a cannonball on a stone floor, and after he drops it, it weighs less. And so my huge epiphany was, oh my God, atoms are already right on the boundary of light speed, and they pop over light speed all the time, and when they do, they're turning into a wave. It satisfies Einstein's model. I mean, this is Nobel Prize type of material, and I probably shouldn't say that. I'll get flamed for my ego. But if you think about what I've done, I've resolved all the greatest mysteries that our scientists can't put together.
How thrilling is that? Here. That is so thrilling. You must have been levitating when you had these epiphanies.
I was so stunned when I put this together. I literally ran around the house screaming with joy.
Oh, I can imagine.
Because I suddenly realized it all came together, and I realized I now can explain how the pyramids were built. I now can explain teleportation. I now can explain time travel. I got it. You
sure do. And I cannot recommend this book highly enough. The Source Field Investigations. Go to David's website, divinecosmos.com. The videos there are awesome. You can sit for hours and just comb the website. David, thank you.
Well, let's hang on, and we'll do a third week, because there were things I said in the first week that we were going to talk about here that we didn't get to.
I'd love to. Okay.
We'll make it a complete thought here. So,
guys, join me and David next week. We're going to keep up the pace. Till then, this is Maxine Taylor. May the stars shine brightly on you and yours.